Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It. I'm Sheri Lopez, human trafficking survivor, founder of Pearl at the Mailbox, and founder and president of the Arizona Human Trafficking Survivors Coalition, and founder of the National Grooming Prevention Hotline. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Today's conversation is one that I think creates a tremendous amount of confusion, not only for parents, but basically for everyone and professionals too, even law enforcement, educators, and communities. It confused me for a long time until I really understood it. So, what am I talking about? It's called the Romeo and Juliet law. So, what is it? Well, we'll talk about it. Does every state have this law? Well, we'll talk about it. What are the strengths of this law and what are some of the weaknesses? And perhaps more importantly, why do these laws sometimes create confusion when it comes to grooming, exploitation, and human trafficking? Because those are very different things, and understanding the difference can help. So, what is a Romeo and Juliet law? Let's begin with the basics. Romeo and Juliet laws are legal provisions designed to recognize that relationships between teenagers and young adults who are close in age are different from predatory relationships involving significant age differences. In other words, lawmakers understand that there is a difference between a 17-year-old dating an 18-year-old and a 40-year-old pursuing a 14-year-old. Without these provisions, young people who are close in age could potentially face the same criminal penalties and even sex offender registration requirements as adults who intentionally prey on young children. The purpose of these laws is to provide some legal protection when the age difference is a small gap. Now, every state approaches this a little bit differently, and some states have specific Romeo and Juliet laws with very specific boundaries. Some states have what's called close in age exemptions built into their statutes, and some states have different age thresholds and requirements. So while the concept exists throughout much of the country, there is no universal Romeo and Juliet law that applies equally across all 50 states. Every state is different, and not every state even has one. I want to read to you what I pulled this up online because I was curious too. Now, I know in Arizona we have a Romeo and Juliet law, but granted, this comes from ChatGPT, so take it as it is, but I was just curious here in this last moment. I asked, does every state in the U.S. have a Romeo and Juliet law? And this is the answer. No, not every state has a Romeo and Juliet law, and even among the states that do, the laws vary considerably. A Romeo and Juliet law is designed to prevent teenagers or young adults who are close in age from being prosecuted as sex offenders when they engage in consensual sexual activity. That's the key word, consensual, but it also trips up potential trafficking cases. These laws recognize that there is a difference between exploitation and relationships involving peers who are close in age. So here are some key points. Most states have some type of close in age exemption, but the age difference allowed and the protections provided differs from state to state. A few states have no specific Romeo and Juliet provision, meaning individuals may have to rely on the direction of the prosecution and other legal defenses. Some states allow a defense to criminally charge but do not prevent arrest. Okay, let me read that again. Some states allow a defense to criminal charges but do not prevent arrest. Some states provide protection from being required to register as a sex offender. Others apply when other individuals are above certain ages or within a certain number of years of each other. So, here are a couple examples. Texas has a well known Romeo and Juliet law that can exempt certain close in age couples from sex offender registration. Florida has a Romeo and Juliet provision, but it mainly allows offenders to petition for removal from the sex offender registry. Arizona does not have a law officially called a Romeo and Juliet law, but Arizona law contains close in age provisions and specific defenses in certain situations. Now, I believe that has changed. I think here in Arizona we do have a Romeo and Juliet law, but I'll have to double check and get back to you. California does not have a traditional Romeo and Juliet law, but close in age relationships are often treated differently in sentencing and prosecution. Wisconsin and several other states have more limited protection. So here's what's important to understand. Having a Romeo and Juliet law does not automatically mean a relationship is healthy or free from grooming or exploitation. A relationship can fall within a legal age gap and still involve grooming, coercive control, emotional manipulation, trafficking, sexual exploitation. The law focuses primarily on age and consent, while grooming and trafficking are more about power, which we did talk about before. Now, let me get back over to where I was before so I can keep myself focused. Understanding grooming, which I seem to talk about every time because that's where my focus is on grooming prevention. Uh, Again, grooming is an intentional process. It's built on trust, meeting needs, creating dependency, testing boundaries, and maintaining influence over another person for the purpose of manipulating, controlling, or ultimately exploiting someone. And exploitation is the act of using another person for one's own benefits, gain, power, or gratification at the person's expense, which would be the victim. So, simply put, grooming is the process, exploitation is the outcome. Grooming opens the door, exploitation walks through it. And that's important because exploitation rarely begins with exploitation. I always say that again, exploitation rarely begins with exploitation. It again is friendship, attention, kindness, understanding, feeling like you belong, being accepted by a group. And that's why these situations are difficult to understand when it's close age relationships. It's frustrating too because it makes the 15, 16, and 17-year-olds very, very much at risk because they could be forced to say that they are in a consensual relationship with somebody a little bit older because they're being forced to. So a lot of times the exploiter or a trafficker doesn't always get charged because it's deemed okay, it's a consensual relationship per Romeo and Juliet. And so this is why people become confused. I think one of the biggest misconceptions people have is this: they're close in age, so it can't be trafficking, or they're boyfriend and girlfriend, so it can't be exploitation. But remember this, exploitation doesn't ask for proof of age before it occurs. Manipulation doesn't stop because two people are only a year apart. And control doesn't disappear because both individuals attend the same school. And grooming doesn't require a 10 or 20-year age difference. In fact, many trafficking survivors initially believed they were in relationships. Many families believed they were witnessing young love. Friends saw only boyfriend and girlfriends. What they didn't see was the manipulation. They didn't see the dependency or the fear that was created or the control. And they certainly didn't see what was happening behind the closed doors. Romeo and Juliet laws, I get them, but it makes, especially in the 15, 16, 17-year-old age group, depending upon the state's laws, it can make it very frustrating to try and prosecute a case like that where the 17-year-old is saying that they are being trafficked by the 18-year-old because that victim, because of the manipulation and the coercion and the pressure, often would be forced to say, no, I consent to this relationship, but they really didn't. So we still have a long way to go in trying to work through all of that. It's unfortunate that we have this problem. I know that I understand what they're trying to do, to protect innocent relationships. But in Arizona, we had a our Romeo and Juliet law was to protect somebody that had a 2-year age difference. Now it's a 5-year age difference. Just leaves such leeway and for exploitation. Uh, so why does a Romeo and Juliet law exist? Well, it does to protect young people from severe criminal penalties when they engage in consensual relationships with peers close to their age. Consensual, that's it. Without these laws, situations involving two teenagers or young adults who are only a few years apart could result in one person being charged with a serious sex offense and in some cases being required to register as a sex offender for life. Now, I don't want any of that to happen, but it's also how do we protect those young people that are actually being protected? So, the Romeo and Juliet law is intended to protect teenagers and young adults in consensual relationships who are close in age. Individuals from receiving punishments that lawmakers consider disproportionate to the conduct, young people from carrying a lifelong criminal record or sex offender registration for behavior that may not involve exploitation or trafficking. Now, families, I understand in families from the devastating consequences that can occur when a consensual peer relationship becomes a felony offense. I get that. Um, what about So these laws, they were created. Sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place. This is one of those days that, as I think I've shared before, I've been beat up quite a bit and punched in the head quite a bit. And so there's days that what is in my brain takes a while to get out of my mouth. So sometimes I may speak clearly. Other times I'm going to fumble over my words. I'm going to pause for a little bit. But this is the reality of being trafficked. But it's not going to stop me from educating either. So, these laws were created to recognize the difference between a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old dating each other and a 35-year-old exploiting like a 14-year-old. The Romeo and Juliet law attempts to distinguish between peer relationships and predatory relationships. But again, Romeo and Juliet laws are not designed to protect grooming. Just hang with me, okay? I'm having a hard day, and again, they're designed to protect close relationships, but they're not designed to protect grooming. And here's some confusion. Grooming and Romeo and Juliet laws address different issues. Romeo and Juliet laws ask, were these individuals close enough in age that criminal penalties should be reduced or avoided? Grooming asks, was one person intentionally building trust, creating dependency, testing boundaries, and manipulating the other person for the purpose of control or exploitation? And yes, grooming does happen in close age relationships. Grooming is about power, influence, and manipulation, not simply age. For example, a 17-year-old can groom a 15-year-old. An 18-year-old can groom a 16-year-old. Two teenagers can have a relationship where one person uses isolation, coercion, threats, emotional dependence, and control over the other. In those situations, the age difference may fall within a state's close in age provisions, but the relationship itself still, may be healthy and exploitative. And this is the challenge. Grooming can be so difficult to recognize because it looks like a relationship. And this is where there's just struggles when going to court because it's all based on the word consensual. And it's frustrating. I continue to work on this and I'll continue to work on this. I'm going to cut this short today. I'm just really struggling with my words and my mouth today, and I'm sorry for that, but I want to give you a taste of what it's like sometimes, and the struggles that I have when I'm trying to convey a message, especially one that really frustrates me. And the Romeo and Juliet law does frustrate me because sometimes it seems like it's a get out of jail free card, so to speak, for those that are grooming or manipulating somebody for exploitation or trafficking that is 15, 16, or 17 with somebody that might be like 18, 19, or 20. Um, a little heartbreaking and a lot more work to do. So, thank you for hanging with me today. Please visit pearl@themailbox.org to learn more about what we do on the prevention side and get involved. And if you'd like to partner with us, we would appreciate that. You can see all those opportunities on our website as well. So, you all have a great day. Thank you.